listening to Mr. Adrian Van Deusen, who's wonderfully come up here and volunteered his time and agreed to tonight. We really gotta give him some support here. That's a tough job. And Adrian has, you know, I think one of the cool common things of commonalities of the people we've had speak here is that they have such broad-reaching expertise, and the same goes with Adrian as well. Not only is Adrian the owner of Italis Communication, which I probably totally butchered, didn't I?
It all is communication.
Yeah, it is all, yeah. Founder of the Brazilian Biofeedback Association, many other things. He's involved with Brain DX, and we are going to get to listen to Adrian's findings on brain and heart training at the same time. So really kind of getting the bottom up and the top down intervention. So this is going to be exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, this is really a wonderful opportunity. If it's too loud, you guys tell Steve and adjusting really okay. But this really is a wonderful opportunity. It has been for a few years. Thanks so much to the folks at MSBMB and especially to the folks at Biomedical Instruments. They've called me here now 2012, 2013, 2015, and I'm seeing some familiar faces. You see all again, all y'all. And in that sense, you might remember those who were here in 2012, we talked about chemoencephalography. We discussed the difference between temperature and light-based interventions, and really kind of, I was able to apply my critical eye to something that is so much a day-to-day practice that you don't stop and think about. And the next year, although it was a smaller group, I had to go head-to-head against Tom Kalura, so you know, won that one. Was a very interesting opportunity for me to be able to bring up some data that we've been collecting about slowing down the feedback signal to the point that a person might become aware of it. I think it's worth noting that EEG is also a slow form of biofeedback. It's blood. We can't make blood appear in an instant. It takes a while to get there and concentrate. And so these are things that really interest me. Outside maybe the day-to-day practical applications of your profession, these are things, the questions, you know, that the MSBMB has really allowed me to explore and put out there in this exploratory fashion. And today I want to share another practice that I have had over these years that came from, first of all, understanding more of the work of Dr. Gibbers and Dr. Lair and heart rate variability as a concept, and playing around with old wave rider units back in the late 90s, you know, looking at my heart rate pattern. As well as what I just get by playing around with these little devices and understanding that a signal comes from ground of an active interference, and what you can do with those three devices, what those three little points of reference can turn into. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is using an EEG amplifier, EEG sensors, to very quickly capture a heart rate signal and, of course, through your software, be able to do heart rate variability simultaneous with the electroencephalogram, which you're accustomed to using for neurofeedback, right? Simply switching one electrode to one other side, and you can pick up what we would normally call cardioballistic artifact and make use of it. All right, so let's get into it by, as always, establishing our feet on the ground. A little bit of a, you know, maybe some terms, get some concepts together. So when I say systems laws, what we call systems theory. So one of the laws of systems theory that we see played out in so many areas of science, and we can talk about it here in our own field, in which Dr. Geffert did such a great job setting up for me and grateful for when he talked about the gastrointestinal system and heart rate variability, or chronic pain and sympathetic innervation of the nerves, spindles, and heart rate variability. So, Jimmy, you know, the example, I put a question mark in that first example because we don't really know if the beating of a butterfly's wings in Africa will change the weather in Japan. We don't know, but that's the concept, and that's what we're talking about, this concept that any part of a system, if changed, will have an effect on the whole of the system, okay? We know it in the genetic code because if one protein coupling can change the whole form of a body. And we know it in our own work because by training heart, we can measure correlative gastrointestinal effects. That's general autonomic tone. When I talk about autonomic tone, this is the next thing that I want to just kind of help to establish. This is that common picture. You notice that there are two spinal cords, but of course it's the same spinal cord, having two nerve ramifications. You know, the innervations of the parasympathetic bundles, so I get these mixed up. It's parasympathetic ganglia, yeah, and the sympathetic innervations. They all go to the same single organ. So even though you have the autonomic nervous system, you have these two branches that then come down and sort of reaches over all of the non-conscious door. Yeah. Those sort of non-conscious homeostatic life-maintaining functions like digestion, like sleep, reproduction, and heartbeat. So thinking of it as from that top-down perspective, we're at the very bottom of this my framework here. Everyone can question as they will, where you've got parasympathetic and sympathetic branches under one system, the autonomic nervous system. Now let's take it out a little bit further. Now you've got this one autonomic nervous system over that person's left leg. You also have the peripheral nervous system. Both of these can control different organs. The peripheral nervous system is muscle, the striated muscle, things you use to stand up and sit down, move. And the autonomic nervous system, the unconscious activities. These are two systems, and of course they go all the way down to the molecular cellular level, and yet we can follow them up to, these are, instead of two branches of one system controlling the same organ, it's one organ controlling the two systems. Central nervous system, we really think of it as the brain. Of course, it has all of the spinal nerves and medulla and everything contained within it, but when we think of the central nervous system, we think of the brain. So the central nervous system receives and sends, right, to the CNS. There's a communication two-way street between those two below, but the CNS is the one above. Because I may have a fear response that reaches, I may have noxious information received coming to my brain, but I can choose to not act on it. And so there's a control. If I maintain my breathing at a specific rate, I may be in a war situation, yet I will be telling my brainstem that, hey, it's all okay out there. So there's this conscious level that the CNS allows us to do. Whereas, for the most part, these ANS and CNS have their strongest innervations through the vagus nerve, the afferent pathways, and the afferent pathways is really the central nervous system domain. Okay. When we train biofeedback, the tendency is to speak of it in these terms. When we train with biofeedback, we're training either peripheral or autonomic system. When we train with neurofeedback, we're training central nervous system. And there's a major difference in your approach to to how to train and how to, let's say, wake up that person to their position in what's their role there sitting in that chair. One's far more active than the other. So from what that we know, and I think we've established enough information to take it forward onto the next part of our talk. From that, we know that we can now have, that's psychophysiology, right? Or that's the physiology of the psyche. And now we can go to application. Biofeedback becomes aware of one of their secondary or nervous system organs, and then they can control this organ for, this is important, for greater health and calming. Neurofeedback, a person becomes aware of their own brain, that's the organ, and they can consciously control its function. Also to that same end, generally towards calming or more of a homeostatic balance of the system. Also, it's really important to mention that in both of these phrases, in both of these approaches, there's another thing very much in common. Besides just giving them the feedback, that feedback does what? It makes us aware. It creates a conscious element to things that previously we didn't even know were going on. In the brain sense, it has absolutely no awareness of what's going on. It doesn't know of itself at all. It simply knows of the world around it. So there's one So these are how we can respond. And I think, in a later, I have a citation in a later slide, but remember that these are talking, it's a two-way street. And so a person who's controlling their autonomic function can have a measurable effect on the central nervous system function. So even though I don't have sensors on my brain, I may be able to actually make an effect or change my brain just by doing heart rate variability training. Well, that's been shown to be the case, in fact, that there is a significant difference between control groups and training groups in terms of theta wave production in the brain. If I think that here we have an example. So remember that the change in any part will affect the whole. If I change my heart rate pattern, my variability pattern, I will be changing my digestive gastric acid production. I'll be changing my digestive efficiency. And we see this in one example, which is, these are very recent articles. This was pulled from one of our organization's PubMed registered journals, the EECG journal. The effects of single session short duration is one session heart rate variability on the EEG. And they found that there was a very clear and replicable effect in the brain's electrical pattern, both during and after the intervention. There was a period of, let's say, glow that lasted for a while in the brain in terms of increased EEG activity. Now, this is, I say and vice versa, but there probably are better, I could have done a better job of the graphical study here. But then vice versa, I was trying to show something that talks about brain training and how other autonomic measures could be modified. What this really is talking about is a Japanese study talking about how simply choosing to do a breath pattern, no information at all. It's just a Zen meditation of breathing, focusing on, they were calling it increasing attention capacity in the study. But what it tended to do was increase theta activity all along the cingulate gyrus, but principally they were measuring the frontal area. But by doing a specific breathing pattern, they were increasing theta activity in the brain right on the cingulate gyrus. Can anybody give me an example, or that you can think of, or one of these colloquial statements of the way that brain training might affect blood pressure or heart rate? Or you guys look into these things too, right? Alpha theta. Yeah. There's a tendency towards parasympathetic tone in a general sense. Yeah, we could definitely say that. No specific organ, but Linda mentions our president mentions the tendency towards parasympathetic tone. Alpha theta. Yes, you can. I've got one though. I do have one that I remember. Alpha training in decreasing cortisol. Anyone remember that? This is the 1990s. No, alpha amplitude training. Alpha amplitude training. This is a study that came out of the manager.
And just to kind of segue, I think alpha theta is always, biofeedback and neurofeedback, and you had to do the pre-skills down the biofeedback.
Exactly. Alpha oftentimes, and this is a different subject, but alpha theta you would normally, if anyone has content, emotional content, would normally work more the robust states of theta reduction, beta increase before going into those, let's say, less limited states, or this expansive state. So yeah, in terms of the tendency. But I thank you for that very much. I've been trying to find the two sides of most coin, and here was my attempt on this slide. Now when I look back at the slide, I'm seeing that it really both are. Heart affects the brain. We can leave it at that. There has been one study, which I'm not able to cite right now, of increasing alpha amplitude and concomitant reduction of cortisol levels in blood serum, but I will have to find that citation. Anyway, the point is, it is a two-way street, and there seems to be a bit of a potential for synergy between the two. They're always talking to each other anyway, central nervous system and autonomic nervous system. There may be a potential for synergy in using that to our benefit. And so when I look at what's really the strength of heart rate variability biofeedback? Why don't I just do that? If it does affect the brain, why don't I just do heart rate variability? It's cheap, it's easy to teach, and you sort of think. People can take it home, you know. So it's easily self-witnessed, managed, and learned over this. Observe the phenomenon, make adjustments, make changes, observe the change, and then through repetition automate, which is the operant conditioning, that type of concept. It's easy to get. It's slow enough that you can just see that heart rate accelerating. You don't just see it up there like you can see in brain activity. It's on its way up. You can feel it. You can feel the pressure increasing in your chest, as the baroreceptors are also making their work at the vagus nerve level, brainstem level. Right? Now, so that's its strength. It's slow enough that you can get it, and you can teach it, and you can put it into a learning model. Whereas with EEG neurofeedback, the most common response that I hear, and this is me giving a little bit of coaching and everything, but at the end of the session, I feel great. Cool. Well, how'd you do that? I have no idea. I just feel great. You did something magical to me, and it's really hard to transfer that over to the person and say, how can you do this at home? You know, it's partially because, so that's why it's difficult to with a question mark. Because I've been able to notice changes in my vision, been able to notice changes in the neck muscle tension and how I hold my head up, just shifting between alpha predominant and beta predominant. So if you're really paying attention, you can notice the brain shifts, but you have to pay attention to your body. Not your, maybe to some degree the type of thoughts, or the visual thoughts, or the mood thoughts. But that's just such the meditators. You're getting someone who's coming in, oh my gosh, I'm about to have a meltdown. They're not looking at these self. And so it's very hard to self-observe. Also, again, the brain has no proprioceptive tracts. It simply receives from the sensory organ. So, but because of the nature of brain frequency to mind-state relationship, we know there's a difference between predominant delta, difference in state. Predominant delta, you're asleep. Once you move into theta, you're not asleep anymore, you're half asleep, or starting to wake up, or falling asleep, right? When you move into alpha, okay, now I'm in the room, you know, but I'm not necessarily thinking about it. So these shifts in state, from internalized to aware to active, can be measured in the brain frequency patterns that we talk about. So delta, theta, alpha, low beta, high beta. And also the functional neuroanatomical framework, also where you place your senses, does allow us to have incredible specificity. So though the heart is simple to get, the brain is a very exact tool. You know, this is the best we have at EEG. If we're good at understanding the location of the sensor, with what regions we're speaking, with what networks we're speaking, and what speeds that they tend to operate at, we can make very incisive changes to, well, let's say, someone who has dyslexia. There's controversy about that. And might say it's not, or there are, or, you know, when you talk about obsessive compulsive or disassociation, you know, those are very hard, and they are, yet I would hazard to say that you would choose a different protocol with someone who has, you know, OCD than you would with someone who has attention problems. That's specificity. And we can't do that with heart rate variability. You have a general relaxing response. So strengths are the other, one strength is the other's weakness. I think I'm setting this up for a real easy punchline, but here we go. So let's do the synergistic pairing. Now, this is a lot of that you can do yourself. The ways of doing it, they usually do it sequentially. They start with heart rate variability, then they go to brain training. But this thing simultaneously trains an increase in heart rate variability while also training attention, in this case, attention. Seems almost paradoxical if we're increasing data, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The rationale is clearly explored in a number of applications, like Brazilian studying with artists and publishing very recently in the International Journal of Psychophysiology, with classical dancers, their ability to deal with stress, as well as be creative. Oh, there's the specificity, right? There's the calming and also performance at the same time. Autistic spectrum disorder, a recent study by Synergistic that proposes a gain interface that talks about facial and emotional recognition, but it's employing the heart rate variability as the calming, centering, anchoring elements to the whole game. Traumatic brain injury, Donald Moss published on this in a very recent publication of Biofeedback in a popular journal. And I have to mention that Michael and Linda Thompson have their hands in a lot of studies. They're very active in research from Ontario. Yeah, Ontario. Independent of applications, they are recognizing that heart rate variability can be included in a number of problem areas. They're not touching on performance right now, but they publish both on autistic spectrum and TBI. So they're saying that there's a benefit to the two, and I'm agreeing, and I'm just going to propose, and this is probably not going to last an hour and a half. I'm sure you're all thinking about it, but there is beer out. I was told to say that. Okay, so I'm milking your time a little bit because I know it's not an hour. So normally the present day implementation is it's a 1 hour session, right? 2 times a week, and you come in and the person sits down, they put the little fingers on, the ear clip on, and they're sitting in the chair, and having fun with the breathing while you're putting the sensors on. And then when that's done, okay, turn that off, and now we're going into the real work. Whereas we've done your token training here to calm you and center you, and that's about as far as it goes, in my opinion. I have a critique down the road. But for the remaining part of the session is EEG. And maybe every once in a while it says, remember to breathe, or, okay, when you go home, you're going to breathe, right? Remember? They don't give them home training for, EEG. They don't say, okay, practice your alpha wave. They just say, okay, practice that breathing with this pacer. And it can be very effective. Everyone knows it can be very effective if they do it right. So, but it's to some degree disassociated with the deeper work, with the specific work of the EEG. My critique to that is that the sequential aspect separates the two clearly integrated systems. It makes them as if they're two separate things, so that the heart rate variability is just sort of a primer for your main course. It's the appetizer. And the operative conditioning just can't happen in 5 minutes, 2 times a week. It just can't happen. That repetition is one of the main tenets of that type of automation habituation. So though it is powerful and though it really does improve the moment of the EEG training, I think that there's more that we can do. And it does require a little bit of thinking on how you can do it. I propose this as a proposed implementation. But meanwhile, what I'm going to say to you here is that you can use your EEG amplifier to capture EKG to your bed. So you don't have to have something else while you put the sensors. While you're putting the sensors on, you're doing both, right? You're getting the EKG and the EEG right then and there. But so you just start to talk and prepare the person mentally for, okay, now we're going to get into our exercise period. Remember that you have the power of your breath at all times and this and that. While you're putting the sensors on, hey, tell me sometimes during your day where you notice yourself breathing differently, paying attention to your breath, how does that work for you? And, getting them in a mental state to start to train. And then train the session with simultaneous EEG and EKG or EEG, or electrocardiogram. Whereas in the training paradigm, the heart rate variability is not the spectral analysis, it's that old school waveform, but the standard deviations of the heart rate variability over the past seconds. It's taking the standard deviation measure of the heart rate variability so that the greater the variability, the more the heart rate variability feedback just fades out. They're supposed to be doing that naturally anyway. So that is the only feedback they have when it's low. But as they start to increase or succeed, as they start to go into a more resonant breathing state, or naturally the wave is larger, then the feedback fades out, and what comes in is the EEG feedback. So it's like a massive, or like a crossfade that comes down with one when they're doing well, so that the other can start to stand out even more. And that you have primes, but you never stop the priming. You're continuing the flow through on the autonomic pathway, so that you've got real assurance of parasympathetic. then being able to deal with these higher level cortical dynamics. And of course, offer the home training routine for learning transfer and brain state induction. Because if they're breathing while they're doing the brain training, it's not this, then the other. It is through breathing, I am having an emotional, I'm having a memory, I'm having all of these links with breathing and the desired state. So if I just start to breathe at that time, similar to how a song can trigger a memory, or a smell can trigger a memory, the same can, if I'm using the breathing while doing the EEG, as I breathe at home or in the car or in the line at the grocery store, I'm also probably generating more alpha. I haven't tested this. This is the idea of simultaneous synergy, right? So learning to breathe is also including the EEG learning. It's a carrier for that, theoretically. So anybody's ever tried to do this knows that you're working like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a lot of electrodes, using more than one box. You know, you've got to have room on a screen or a second monitor to have 2 different software. You look over here and look over there. You know, it can be like a bundle of stuff. You know, to keep it all PG. This can be a complexity that is going to require anybody who's not interested in computers to just give up. They just don't do it. It's, you know, and you can see how happy the child is about all this. I'm really have to give thanks to the internet for all the wonderful pictures. And I'm trying to, the only picture I took are this one down here, the software that we use. Okay. So multiple modes make for many wireless boxes with concurrent software demands. Or, in a practical consideration, an elegance can be created by using your EEG amplifier so that the montage can, you can sort of have just a single screen that has both the EKG and the EEG on simultaneous. I'll show you in a video. You can have one tracing that is a little noisy because I did not put it in the prior reading, so there's some linkage there, but for those of you who care. But the tracing will allow you to eyeball as a technician everything going on at the same time. And then one device you're going to lose one device to read them all. Okay. You get it. Okay. So we're using the power of the jumper to have our reference be the same both for the EEG and for the EKG. So you've basically got 4 electrodes. That's all we have. It's 4 electrodes, and we're able to get both of those signals in. Anybody who's buying a unit these days usually doesn't get a jumper with them, but has anybody seen these before? The jumper. I'm going to pull this guy out for you. This is a jumper. It basically means if I put an electrode here, I also put it here. And so it allows me to bridge. It allows one electrode to circle 2 channels. All right. This is part of my demo. I got to put it back. All right. And, well, we have the channel 1 is on the head, channel 1 negative, and channel 2 negative is on the right ear. Ground is anywhere. And then your channel 2 active is actually on the left fingertip. There's a little muscle activity happening there. However, the physiological consideration is the largest electromagnetic bioelectrical wave that goes through the whole body. You can measure it on the toe. Got it. It's not as large a wave as if you were right over the thoracic cavity or the ribs cage, but it is measurable. And so that we can use that to our benefit. All we really need to do is have the bibrachial montage. Basically, we just make sure that if it was head, it would be a bipolar montage. Right? But we need to have one on one side of the spine, the other on the other side of the spine to pick up that wave loud and clear. And so, I mean, bibrachial montage can come from the ear, the clavicle. That you guys all know that one, right? When you're doing an EEG and you want to separate that, or this is more common EKG site right there over the heart. But we've also seen, I'm sure everyone's seen this as well, but they put it right over the condyle, the radio, fingertip, which we'll talk about. I've done it on the kneecaps before. Yeah, as long as one is on the right side, there's on the left side, you can pick up the EKG. And so let's take advantage of that. Why on the kneecap? Because you want to stay away from one way that you can get noise in the signal is with EMG. You want to go over a bone, right? Because it's more on the work towards it. The clavicle is actually this famous being tension. If there's no tension here, we're messing up our EKG. This was a video. Okay, so here's a little example of, this was an alpha theta designed through bank. This is one standard deviation, two, three, four, 5 standard deviations of the variability. So here you would have a lower bar. You probably wouldn't even hit the 2 standard deviations, which is the minimum. And this larger wave, when you start to get a resonant breath, comes down to 4 standard deviations. And as these come down, the sound fades out. We don't have sound. We learned that earlier. Well, okay, just imagine there's a ding, ding, ding with each one of those. And as it increases, a bing, 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 bing. As it decreases, a ding, 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 ding. So the person can hear their beat. They can hear a fast wave, and they can also hear in a chromatic scale. They can hear the acceleration and the deceleration. But as it goes down, it fades out, and you start to get, which should be, that wasn't there. Did you see when I went to the spectral display a second ago? I don't know what I'm talking. Basically, the EEG is set to 200 microvolts scale with much larger rate. You can get 20 microvolts scale. And this is the spectral display. So this person's being, you can put an EEG. Doesn't matter. Point is, they've got a very simple paradigm for EEG training, and yet they've also got that green bar kind of keeping them in tune, and you in tune also with how well they are maintaining that diaphragmatic breath. That's an example of the training. It doesn't, I've done it with alpha theta, I've done it with alpha, and it's very easy to just change your filter set and you get increases in with theta reduction or theta beta instead of alpha theta. It's not very hard to make that sort of change and take a single design and do some practice in clinic. You're certainly not adding too much complexity. You're only just shifting one electrode to another spot, you know. And then from there, we may be able to explore some very unique, sometimes paradoxical demands on the system. For example, calm attention, right? I have to be calm, and I can probably be better at my test if I'm calm, but I'd have to pay attention to SAT for goodness sake, you know? But more common than not, and what you mostly see in the literature is theta training in concurrence with heart rate very, very passive measures. But I haven't seen anything about combining the two, where you have the frontal mid, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. Frontal midline theta production has been correlated closely with heart rate variability phenomenon, and also closely with meditative exercise. So we could catalyze, let's say, the potential of the depth of the meditative experience by keeping the EEG in the loop while we're working on the breathing as well. Heart rate variability increase has been correlated to theta and to alpha increases, and calming internalizing effects are noted in both heart rate variability, both with alpha and theta. So they just go hand in hand. They're the most natural, it's like, you know, right hand, left hand sort of thing. They just meet up perfectly. They do tend to have calming effects. That's the expected outcome, and here then would be some potential applications, for example, as I spoke. Calm focus and attention. Training an external focus while triggering an internal awareness. This is, if anything, it is an increase of the observer. That person who's able to pay attention to the room and themselves at the same time, the conversation and what they're about to say, and when not to say it, hopefully, increasing that sort of the space between I'm in it and I'm aware of it. You know, to allow the person to act more than they react. Be an actor in their life. Train the hypnagogic states while anchoring in the breath, so that they don't fall asleep as much. You'll know it, not because of the sleep spindle or because of the theta, but you'll know it because oftentimes with breathing, their variability will just naturally start to reduce, and you can help them, you know, wake back up. They've gone too far back into the crossover, they've lost so, you know, so use the breathing as an anchor to that, as well as use the EKG as a paradigm to add conscious elements and catalyze the subtle knowledge transfer, where the person is doing the alpha training, they feel great, but they don't know how they did it. If it's Dumbo's magic feather, if it's a total, you know, if it helps them fly, let them do it. You know, use the breathing thing. You know, that's my opinion, and I'm gonna believe. Just thank you to God. And I think the MSBMB in general, to allow me to explore some of these things that really mean a lot to me, and I probably wouldn't even be able to present them at, you know, some larger conference right now, but I feel amongst friends. And so thank you so much for having called me these times. I'm pretty much out of ideas, so I think I'll come here as a listener next time. Okay? I appreciate all the wonderful support you give me. Well, I was, yeah, I've got a, yeah. We all have a budget. I got a baby. Is there a question before we go into demo mode? Yes.
I quite understand what the heart rate variability is. There's something about standard deviation.
Yeah, EKG. So the mathematical paradigm is you've got your BPM, right? You've done your interval measure, and then you divide it by 60. You've got your BPM, and that's going in, and then you run it through a standard deviation calculator. So the BPM is going through. That's we'll go back and show you. So these bars are graphic representations of two standard deviations. Orange is three standard deviations. But I'm doing standard deviations of the BPM over and I found that one technique was too short, was too volatile, and you need to have at least 7 seconds with our sweet spot. And if I have, I believe I certainly do not, yes, I do in my backpack have a little dongle, I can pull it up, and together let's have a look at the circuitry behind it. There's Byard's 4 works in a sort of a visual algorithm paradigm, so it's flow charts. It's pretty easy to, you make a bank. It is. You're talking about this guy here? That's the BPM. Yep. It is, but I find that in the smoothness is very neat. And how much time? What's time? Okay. 6:14. So I have more than that. Right. So let me just share with you guys a little technique, and it goes along with breath pacing, where it doesn't use counting. It's more of an intuitive way of learning. Now, there's a software that we use at the clinic in Atlanta, Dr. Cantor's clinic in Atlanta, where it's called Alive, and it measures different breathing rates with the pacer, and then it looks at how the spectral plot lines up and finds what is the most resonant breath rate. And that's a very effective scientific way to do it. And then you have your counter, you have your breath in, breath out. It's well managed. But for the kids, they don't count, and a lot of the adults get stressed by counting and this sort of thing. And also, I found that just the 8 minutes that it took for the text to do that, then I'll do it every time because I recognize the importance. And I kind of, okay, guys, you've got to do it. And then I say, well, next time I'll do it. You didn't have time. You know, so what I found is that there's more than just poetry in the phrase "follow your heart." You can simply trigger this vasovagal response, this nice, increase, decrease by holding your breath at certain decided moments. So I get the person to understand this track here, the tach, you call it the tachometer. Yeah, the cardio tachometer. I get them to understand it. As they're breathing out, it goes down. As they're breathing up, it goes, okay, that's good. All right, let's do a little exercise where you're going to follow your heart. You don't have to push your heart. You don't have to tell it. It knows. It is you. A baby was born breathing this way, right? Another thing, as well as fashion, since I'm up here talking, I'm going to have your ear, is the parent who says, "Stop crying, stop crying," and then you just keep learning to hold it in and talk quieter and all these other things that are socializing factors that have an immense effect on the adult breathing pattern, and of course then a path towards chronic problems, right? So what I have them do, back to the actual exercise, what I have them do, I just have them get it, Breathing in, it goes up. Breathing out, it goes down. Now, the next time you see it going down, I want you to breathe out until all your breath is out. Don't even look at the screen. Just breathe out until all your breath is out. And anybody can do it. You breathe out. You hold it, and it's going to stay flat for a second. And then it starts coming up anyway. The heart will start to accelerate anyway. And that is the brainstem taking over. Okay, something's going wrong. I'm going to make sure this person stays alive. Well, what we do is we use, sorry that? Oh, there's an echo. Okay, so what I ask the person to do is watch the screen, and they're holding their breath, so it's not their breath that's doing this dynamic. And when it starts to go, then breathe along with it. And then as it makes that curve to the top, then start to breathe out. And in 3 or 4 of these breaths, that little wave, that little difference, variability goes that big. They naturally find their resonance, but they can't be the pusher. They have to be the follower. And then, of course, we work on doing it with your eyes closed. We turn the sound off. We get them to feel, and it feels like the heart's slowing down, and internalize as much as possible. So all of these mathematical concepts are entirely valid, and they're necessarily there to explain a natural phenomenon. And so let's see how close to the natural phenomenon. Hey, yogis are doing it 2,500 years ago. They hadn't sung, right? Another nice one is a nice warm bath. You do a nice warm bath. And you sit in that with your ears underwater, and you can hear your heart, and you can hear your breath. And it naturally will bring, you can feel the expansion, and you can feel the difference between the rib cage and the expansive belly breath. So these are some more natural, non-technical things that can inspire a person to continue this practice. Because they have to practice. So yeah, we take the raw signal, we measure the difference between the time between this, and then we divide that by 60, so you have a constant beats per minute average. And then we take, and that's what we've got right here. That's what this is your beats per minute. Because that person was at 69 beats per minute at that exact second. Then we take that and run it through a standard deviation bank, so that measure, and put a bank that will light up when it's at 2, another one that will light up only when at 3, 2.99 or greater. And it just triggers, and so they've got this little lighted bank that goes up, and as they hold their breath, they'll go boom, and they'll get back. Unfortunately, the audio feedback isn't there, but that's an important part to this whole paradigm. A lot of the stuff can be done with eyes closed.
Another alternative to that would be just let the M-wave coherence. Probably highest level. They just divide low frequency by the other frequency. Sure.
When I'm doing spectral analysis, tell me what you think about this. And I've talked with the guy from Somatic Vision, Brian DeLuz, about this as well. And he said, well, and I've noticed that with the M-wave, the response on those 3 different variables is something like 3 to 5 seconds, way slow. And that's what I found with BioExplorer. When I'm doing the spectral analysis from 0 to 1 second or 0 to, it takes forever for that thing to shift over, even though I know I was on a resonant breath for at least 0 seconds. And he said that they've spent a lot of money, though they licensed the M-wave patents, they spent a lot of money in improving it so that they can benchmark their responsiveness to the spectral analysis, right? So yeah, I agree that is probably a very effective way. And what I'm trying to do is make it as much in the present moment as possible, you know. But I totally agree that is an excellent. Well, it's just a smoking gun in the good sense of the word. It really tells you when you're there.
Your point about letting the person without facing their own.
Yeah.
That's a definite alternative approach.